Real estate investing can bring big reward and big risks. So know your risks. Welcome to the Real Estate Risk Report, the show for real-world insight on real estate investment risk. Now, here's your host, Lance Pederson.
Thank you for joining the Real Estate Risk Report. I'm your host, Lance Pederson. Today I have with me Dr. Van Williams with Proactive Realty Group. How you doing today, Van?
I'm doing fine, Lance. How are you today, sir?
Doing excellent. Thanks for joining me today.
I appreciate you having us.
Yeah, so why don't we get into jump right into it here. So how did you get into the real estate business? I know you've got a pretty interesting story about how you got into the business, but maybe just where did the passion for real estate and where did that sort of kindle, and what are the events that kind of led to you deciding to form Proactive Realty Group?
Well, I got into real estate 23 years ago, and at that time I was looking to rent an apartment, and I had money saved from working, and I went to rent an apartment, and a gentleman comes out as a small 5-unit building, all studios, and a gentleman who was in the unit that I thought was vacant came out and he says, "Hey, the owner's selling this property." And I knew nothing about real estate, and I said, okay. I said, so the guy kind of snarky. He says, "Yeah, so I'm selling this. The guy's selling the property." I said, "Well, what's the owner's name and phone number?" He gave me the owner's name and phone number. I was in my mid-20s, and I called up the owner. His name was Julian Camo, and when I called him up, I said, "I understand you're interested in selling your property." He says, "I am." He says, "Give me $20,000 down and take over the note on a wrap loan, subject to." I knew what none of that meant. I said, "Okay." So a couple days go by, and and he calls me. He says, "Look," he says, "who's your agent?" I said, "I don't have an agent." I said, "I need you to help me with this transaction. I'm new to real estate. I don't know much about it, but I do know how to verify if this is for real or not." He says, "Okay." He introduces me to an agent, Dave Sanderson. I meet him over the phone, and I then go into his office. Subsequently, about a day or two later, we sit down. He explains to me what subject to is. He explains to me what a wrap loan is, and he takes me by the hand. He says, "Look," he says, "Van, I'm going to explain everything to you. I'm going to teach you everything I know about real estate." I said, "Well, I've always had a great interest in real estate because the house I grew up in, I was only taught, hey, walk the stage, get a high school diploma. That was it." So my passion for real estate came from just not being exposed to it, in my early age, and then, as a kid, and then meeting this real estate agent who told me about, all the various ways you can get into property, having really excellent credit, and he telling me, "Hey," he said, "boy, keep your credit straight." He's an older black man. Say, "Hey, keep your credit straight, and you'll be able to do what you need to do. You understand?" I said, "Well, yes, sir." And so we went from there, and he taught me, most of what I know today. However, of course, went to college and, did all those things. And my background is in also psychology. I have my doctorate degree in general psych. I've worked in locked psychiatric facilities. I work with social service agencies, and just, at-risk people in the community, which was a catalyst for the Social Impact Fund. Even many years ago when I started out, I didn't know I was doing social impact. I was just a landlord that I was firm, but also fair. I've had residents who called me up and say, "Hey, I meet all the criteria." This is in my younger investing career. "I meet all the criteria,
Yeah.
but I don't have a ride to the place or help me," or, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's great. So yeah, what led you to ultimately go all the way to get, a PhD? Like, what was the impetus behind that? Was it just because of the career, or was it, what led to that? I mean, it's no easy task to sort of,
No,
get a
it's not.
PhD, and it's quite the time, the investment in time and those sorts of things. So I was curious as to what led you to keep pursuing it to that depth.
Curiosity about human behavior, how things work, why people do what they do. how to be more effective in my helping, because life is all about service. And that's something that, even my wife and I talk about that all the time. She is a Head Start teacher, and she even asked that question that you just asked me. A lot of it came from just wanting to uh, achieve more in life, to be more of a high achiever, to have uh, um, a higher education. Also, the convenience of online school and being able to do a distance education learning. So I went to a university, Madison University, uh, and they had a great distance education program. And if you ask me, I believe it was stricter than if you had gone in person and listened to lectures. Had to do a 127 page dissertation, APA standard format. Had to defend that dissertation, uh, and went from there.
Yeah. So when you decide, when you launched, Proactive Realty Group, I know you've got, a couple different strategies you're doing. Maybe share a little bit about that, like right now, kind of what your investment mandate is and the types of assets that you've got a very specific strategy as to, I believe there's sort of like a no leverage play, and so just maybe fill us in a bit on, right now what the strategy is for Proactive Realty Group.
Okay, and I'm glad you asked me that. Right now, we work really hard. We're really diligent in the social impact space. So it's a ESG focused fund. We invest according to a measurable metric, which is called an impact rate of return, IRR score, that was developed by Warren Buffett's grandson, Howard G. Buffett, who teaches at Columbia University. And he developed this model in conjunction with our third party fund administrator, nesfinancial.com. So our two programs right now we have a 6% program, which is, our investors are paid quarterly. And at the end of the year, they share in 60% of the net income is pro rata share distributed to investors. Very successful with that program. We returned to actual 12% last year in COVID. To our investors at 100% rent collection. Our other program is 10% paid monthly or quarterly, fixed return, no profit share at the end of the year. We do not use leverage. In the areas that we go into and invest, we don't do any gentrification. We stabilize and we build on what's there. We're primarily the Class C, some distressed B properties. Um, we like working for the investor. We like being immediate income for the investor. We like being a trusted source of revenue income for our investors. I was talking with one of our investors, I won't say his first name, but Mr. Eisenberg, and he's under the income program monthly. And so he receives, a little more than 10% per month. He called us up. He had a small investment. But what resonated was he says, well, look, he says, Van, I have adult kids. One's a clerk here at the store, one works over here, and one's, kind of finding themselves in college. And I just want, a monthly income and then, full return of my principal in 2 to 3 years. And we said, okay. So we're in the social impact space, and also we take it a step further that we go in and we call it dignity. We beautify the communities that we invest in, meaning that so for a block that we own properties on, we'll go in, we'll have a dumpster. We use local people in the area. We'll provide a pair of steel-toe boots. We'll provide a safety vest, safety glasses. They have to have identification. They sign a release of liability. We pay $10 an hour, and we work to build the morale of the local people involved and the community. Quite often, some of these properties are in opportunity zones because they're lower socioeconomic areas that are depressed. So we go in and we work, to build it up and provide immediate income to investors. So investors that come in today, 30 days from now or the very next quarter, they get a distribution, they get their check from NES Financial electronically.
So maybe digging in a little bit more into the, ESG, or you mentioned sort of, Buffett's grandson or whatever.
Yes, sir.
From Columbia. Like, how, what does that look like? I mean, how do you said there's some measurements, like the impact, IRR or whatever. So like I guess it's a bit fuzzy to me. Like how do you determine whether an asset or a specific situation that you're looking at sort of meets that criteria, right? So like because here's my take, right? Like
Okay.
my belief is that doing, profit and purpose, are sort of more often than not kind of at odds with one another, right? So like, yeah, if you can do them both, great, it's awesome. But the more that one's trying to be helpful and impact and change people's lives or whatever, then I would assume that I have to give up a little bit more on the profit side. So for someone like you who sort of made a very conscious decision that hey, once again the whole background, right, is that getting the PhD in psychology, you want to make a difference, you want to do those things. So then when you go out as a capitalist then and trying to find situations where you can acquire assets, how does that dictate and impact and affect your asset selection, and how do you not just, because to me it just seems like it's more often than not it's easier to sort of underwrite for profit, right? Like, hey, how can I get this as cheap as possible or for the least less price and add value to it, whereas you're going in and saying you're making decisions based upon not just that, but like how can we make a difference? So maybe give us a little more color on how you do that and how you measure it, and it's very interesting.
Okay, well, I'm glad you had to ask that question. So we go in and we go into properties. Well, first I'll tell you about the metric. So the impact rate of return scoring is based on the census tract. So it's based on the area. So our first order of business in social impact is when we go into a property, so for example, we have a property under contract, one in Chicago, one in Riverdale, Illinois. So we give the address to NES Financial. We contact them. Send them an email. We give them the address, and they're licensed to use Mr. Howard Buffett's scoring model. So they then return to us a report, and they say based on the address and based on the area and the demographics, this is an impact score that this property has. The higher the score, the more impact that it'll have, not just on the immediate community, but on job creation, on all of those things. Now, we've taken upon ourselves to take it an additional step further by partnering with social service agencies. I'm able to use my background in psychology, fulfill more of my own personal passion and purpose to put people to work on the unskilled labor part of it. So we may need to clean out a property. We may need to bring in a dumpster. We may need to do some lawn care. We may need to do just some cleaning up an area. If we cut down some branches, trees, we're putting up cameras, just doing different things. Rehabbing, we may need somebody to help with unloading and unloading equipment, sinks, faucets, lumber, whatever the case may be, flooring, tile, paint. We're able to use people and create impact that way. And then what was the other part of the question?
No, that was sort of what I was looking for. Is just trying to get a sense of the fact that there is it. So for you are, I mean, if you find an asset when you're out there, looking for something to acquire, you've kind of narrowed it down. So what I'm hearing you say is that there may be a situation where you've identified an opportunity, but the impact score is just not. It doesn't sort of meet some threshold that you're trying to. Meaning it would sort of be like, nah, that's just we're going to pass on that deal because of this scoring system. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's accurate. Now, not 100% of our properties will meet the high impact score. I'll say at least 75 to 80% of our properties will meet a higher impact score. Those areas that may not meet a high impact score, we'll make it a point to partner with social service agencies in that area, whether it be a homeless shelter, whether it be veterans in need of housing, who have the VASH programs. That's the veterans form of Section 8. But with veterans, they absolutely have to be followed closely by a social worker or a case manager. We need to know, that they aren't going to be a problem to the property. If we also will house Section 8. We've been involved in confidential housing of women who are leaving a battered situation. Um, what else? We work with an organization in San Leandro, California called Building Futures with Women and Children. And we did a lot of social services work there with real estate. I also have a background in property management. So I have a designation from the International Real Estate Institute as a registered property manager. I also have a green property advisor from Allied Business School. I passed their property management certification. And the other thing is the CPEP after my name, that designation through a family office, I went and earned my certified private equity professional designation for private equity in real estate. So those were some of the reasons I started the fund, because I'd be able to scale. We'd be able to create a lot of impact, going to areas that had previously been experienced a lot of gentrification. And one of the reasons we don't need to use leverage is because we're in that market where we're between, like right now, we're up to about 200 and some odd units in the current pipeline. In current properties, current doors, and then we have like about 1,500 units in our pipeline. So this year we're looking to, we will be closing on roughly 700 to about 1,500 units or more in the social impact space.
Got it. And are these sort of all just like single family detached? Are these like duplexes, fourplexes, like apartment communities? Are they mobile home parks? Can it be a little bit of all the above? And are there certain cities or markets that you're targeting in particular to sort of, make this impact?
Yes, sir. So it's a mix of everything. So like right now we're in Orangeburg, South Carolina. We have other properties in our pipeline in Orangeburg, South Carolina, Columbia, South Carolina, Ohio, Illinois, Michigan, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Denver, Colorado. We have a manufactured home park that is 39 acres, over 187 spaces. We have preliminary approval and plans to add, based on the site plan, to add an additional 100 units to bring in a manufactured home dealership with Legacy Housing USA, which is a publicly traded company on the NASDAQ. They are affordable housing. We're able to bring in modular set housing. So as far as impact goes, we have a lot going on and a lot of potential for a lot of projects.
So would you say, so it's, when you look at it, right, like you don't, the need for leverage isn't there. I guess my interpretation, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, right, but it's sort of these things, you go into these communities and you do this, but it's heavy lifting. Like there's risk here, meaning
yes.
Others aren't willing to invest because there's a lot of risk there. So adding leverage to the equation would just make it even more so.
Much more riskier. Yes.
Yeah. So that's sort of it's like you're going into places that need a lot of sort of TLC and elbow grease and those sorts of things to make this happen. So
yes.
All that to say, if there's a alter ego of Dr. Van Williams, right? Like if you don't got a big heart and an understanding of people and communities and those sorts of things, this is just my interpretation, right? Like if you are just a pure capitalist, just wants to make money, that's sort of the slippery slope between sort of slumlord and saint. Is that sort of how this, not to mention, I'm assuming that some of these other organizations aren't, they're not going to align with people, if that's sort of their main motivation. Is that sort of accurate? Like for you, the skill set that you've acquired and the training, the education you've received makes you uniquely qualified and equipped to carry this out, because you're not just, from the outside looking in, that's just the problem sometimes, is just like, it's great to talk about, 10% returns and whatever, and like all that's great. I mean, of course, that's what the people want on the other side, but it's
Yes,
just
sir.
understanding that this isn't not just any Joe could sort of wake up and decide to go and acquire the assets that you're
No.
acquiring. You really need to know what you're getting into, because that's, I mean, like that fine line of sort of like you being the slumlord and raising rents and driving people out. I mean, that's there's guys who do that kind of thing. They take
Oh
advantage
yeah.
of these situations and
I've
make the
seen that.
situation far worse than better. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, Lance. I've seen that quite a bit. And actually, a lot of the opportunities that come our way are poorly managed properties, or properties that have a lot of code violations, or properties that were poorly managed or had quote unquote slum type, slumlords, people who are just like bloodsuckers, who are just like, hey, pay me, pay me, pay me, and they don't want to do anything to improve the quality of lives for the residents. So, case in point, the property we have at 100 Banachie Circle in Orangeburg, South Carolina, 39-acre mobile home park. It is what I call a rough property, and it's a property that I went into. I started out with about 110 residents. When I say heavy lifting, this is more of my platform property for the rest of my real estate career, so to speak. Other than property that we had in Las Vegas, 53 unit reposition at 2540 Fremont Street. This property in Orangeburg, South Carolina, had a set of unique challenges. We went into it was drug addiction, drug use, drug sales, prostitution, domestic violence, wild dogs, overgrown yard, about 70, I kid you not, through litter control, Orangeburg County, code violations. I came into the property, I forget the exact day, it was October 2018 when we acquired it. And most properties, I go and I get it started, and, I put the right active asset manager there, and, uh, we meet on a weekly basis, constantly back and forth. And then I can go to the next property, and the next property, and the next, and then, I circle back and go to all of them. This one was different. This was more like, okay, I moved into a double wide. So when I was in South Carolina, I spent probably the first few months, I spent about 2 weeks or more out of every month there. And I have, colleagues that manage our other part of our portfolio. Um, Both the toilets were stolen out of the double wide, graffiti on the wall. Second day I went into the kitchen. Second night I was there, turned on the light and was like, whoa, I'm not used to this. Roaches everywhere. I went down to the local mill, got some surrender, got a maintenance man. We sprayed it. Stuff I'd never even heard of. This is Orangeburg. Got rid of that, got the place painted, cleaned up. Um, so for example, I came into the property on a Monday. That Thursday, like 4 days later, after being there, I was in code violation court for the gentleman that sold me the property. And he's just like, hey, Van, I need you to get this place cleaned up. It's going to be condemned. I'm going to give you a good deal on it. And so we accepted it. By the grace of God, I was able to go out, because Craigslist is like in Columbia, South Carolina. It's in Charleston, South Carolina. They don't have an active Craigslist community in Orangeburg, South Carolina. I got a notepad and a pen. I went to the local Lowe's, uh, home improvement store. I walked the aisles until I found, different people that looked like they knew what they were doing. Either they had contracted supplies on the cart. I'll never forget. Ran into a gentleman named Mr. Jamerson. He owns Jamerson Farms in South Carolina. He says, he gets the best sweet corn award. He comes in first or second every year. So what? But at the time, I didn't know who he was. So I approached him, and I'll make it quick. I say, "Excuse me, sir. Do you know somebody I might hire to?" And he turns around, he looks at me, say, "How you doing?" I said, "Well, do you know somebody?" Say, "Fella, how you doing?" I said, "I'm doing fine, sir. How are you?" He says, "I'm good." And so I say, "What's your name, sir?" He says, "This is Jamerson." I said, "Okay, my name is Van Williams, sir." And we talk, and he said, "Okay, you seem like a nice fella." And so then we talk. I say, "Do you know someone that I can, or put me in touch with somebody I can hire some people? I'll pay them $10 an hour. I need 4 or 5 people. I have safety equipment. They just have to sign release of liability, have ID. I need to get some garbage cleaned up for litter control." He says, "Sure." He says, "Write this number down." So I wrote the number down. And he said, okay. I said, Mr. Jamerson. He says, yes. I said, look, I need you to call and make an introduction for me, sir. I just moved here. I'm not from South Carolina. Say, fella, I'm going to stop what I'm doing and I'm going to make this call for you. So he did. And I got on the phone. I talked to the guy, got everything hooked up. And then Mr. Jameson says, and you know what? I invite you out to my farm for some sweet corn. Come in June. And he has a really nice farm. He asked me, well, how big is a mobile home park? I said, 39 acres. Oh, well, I own 300 or 400 acres. I said, wow. I said, that's good. And there I was. So I got everything straightened out in code enforcement court. And I had also a lot of relationships to repair with the utility company, with the local magistrate for evictions, with Republic Waste, with the garbage company, with the tax office in Orangeburg County. So I had this office manager and previous management there that just rubbed everyone the wrong way. The other thing is I started with about 110 residents, and I evicted all the way down to about 22 or 23. Now, I believe in treating people fairly. However, it's we're firm, but we're also fair. In the Bible it says if a man doesn't work, he shall not eat. If you don't pay, you shall not stay. So that's just the bottom line. So once we got rid of this rowdy core group of people who did not want to be a community, who did not want to participate in, making the places, the parks safer, then we started with those 20 and built it back up. And the other thing is I came in a double wide that was 1,500 square feet was renting for like $425 a month. Once we cleaned up the community, we put in new roads. That same place now is $1,200 per month in less than 2.5 years.
To rent that unit in the park. So it's a park owned home.
So that one, it was a park owned home. I just sold it the other day. A lady who was on Section 8 had a lot of kids who have been there for like the last 8 or 9 years. She called me up. She says, Mr. Williams, I found a 5-bedroom for my grandkids and everyone. We're going to move. But everyone else in the mobile home community, we've been able to transition 95% from renters to homeowners, people who never thought they'd be able to own and afford their own home. So we've done that. And we only have to be exact, we have 2 park-owned homes and another resident who's going into rent-to-own this week.
Yeah. So, and I think that's the interesting thing, right? So like you go in, you clean the place up.
Yes, sir.
You get the people out, right? Obviously, like you said, it's a community, and if they don't want to be there and participate in making it a safe place to live, then they need to go. They don't want to pay rent. They got to go someplace else. So
fast.
But so when you came in, you're saying the lot rent was what? It was
okay. So not lot rent, and I'm glad you brought that up because I forgot all about that. The rent to rent an actual unit. So that someone was in like a 3-bedroom, 2-bath for like $425, $425 per month. The lot rents were like $125 and $150 per month. Those lot rents are now $220 to $285 per month. And all of the new units, we just ordered 6 brand new 2021s from Legacy Housing. All of those units that are coming in, are $305 per month. And so we're right on par with Columbia, which is a much larger MSA. It's just that so many people, I don't know if it's just due to COVID, due to the housing boom, so many people are wanting more space, more bang for their buck that's affordable and safe. So it's a gated community. So they're moving from Charleston to Orangeburg, from Columbia, from Summerville, South Carolina. And, we're trying to meet the demand.
Yeah, no, it's good. And I think it just goes to it's interesting because you go in there, right? Lots of work. You got to, like you said, repair all these relationships and kick all these people out, and but then especially, I always bring this up with especially like mobile home parks. I know it's not obviously all the stuff that you guys do, but a lot of people go in, they acquire these mobile home parks, and then they just drive the lot rents up, like beyond what's affordable, right? And then all of a sudden now, these people, it just becomes a bad situation. So you
Oh,
kind of like
absolutely.
overplay your hand. I mean, in this case, it could be like gentrification, where all of a sudden, you come in and hear this once again. This is a social impact thing. So you're going in and saying, well, the people who are good people, you know, you want them to stay and you want them to have a nice community to live in. But at the profit side of it is just knowing, like at some point, if it goes too high, then a bunch of these people wouldn't afford to be able to live there. So how do you balance that? Like, how do you know what? I mean, and then what's the exit, right? So like, because obviously in the mobile home park game, once again, without even thinking about how it social impact or any of that stuff, the name of the game is go in, convert, it from sort of park-owned homes to
Uh-huh.
tenant-owned homes,
Yes.
right? And the more, the closer you get to 100%, the value of the asset goes up. Then you turn around and flip it to some more institutional buyer, right? Which means at that point, they're sort of solely in the game to make money, which means they might come in, and if you left some meat on the bone, they're going to drive the rents and potentially create the problem that I just articulated. So, how do you deal with that? Like, how do you when you're having those conversations about, okay, we're here on lot rent, we're going to go to 250 or 275 or
Uh-huh.
and those sorts of things. How are you making the decision about how much is when enough is enough without overdoing it?
Uh, First thing we keep in mind is that it's an impact property. We're in the impact zone, which is also an opportunity zone, just happens to be, because it's lower
Yeah.
socioeconomic. What we keep in mind is our investor is first. So, being that we don't use leverage, um, we're able to keep prices moderate. So they aren't super cheap, they aren't, real expensive, but we're able to keep prices moderate that a working class person can afford it. For example, during the height of COVID last year, our rent collection was 100%. That's because it's affordable. And affordable doesn't mean less quality or it's bad. It's just that, hey, this is just good blue collar housing. It's just good workforce housing that people can afford and enjoy, and have a safe place to live. So we work really hard to make sure that when we go in to buy a property, we flesh those numbers out, flesh them out again. We really underwrite the deal to make certain that, okay, we're balancing our impact with a certain cap rate, with a certain rate of return for our investors, which happens to be either a 6% preferred or either a 10% program. uh, and make sure that there's enough net cash flow at the end of the year for those who are on the 6% program. But when we go in to buy a property, that's how we know, or when we know, if this is going to work for our impact strategy.
Yeah. And then I guess I mean, it's interesting that you phrase it that way because, and you know, so you said that the investors are first. So
Yes,
when it comes to making decisions, you're going to say what's in the best interest of the members,
absolutely.
which I guess it is. And I'm assuming that when someone decides to invest in one of the programs you put forth, the fund that you're offering now or whatever it might be, it really doesn't matter. And they know that you're executing this social impact sort of strategy. Do you make like are you selective then on the investors that come in to make sure that they too it's sort of like their reason and rationale for investing is because they believe in the social impact side of it? Like if someone came in and was just like, hey, I love this strategy, you're going to do all this heavy lifting to generate 10, 11, 12% returns, um, but they don't really care about the social impact side. Would you turn that investor away, or are you having those discussions? Is that something that you're screening for? Like, hey, do you believe in what we're doing fundamentally? And if you don't, then I'm not as interested in having you as an investor.
Well, we do ask our potential investors, where they are with socially responsible investing. If they're interested in social impact, if they have an interest in ESG, I'll say 95% of them are interested. The 5% that is not, um, they're satisfied with the return. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, where else are you going to get a safe? We're not allowed to say guaranteed by law, but where else are you going to get a safe
Yeah.
6 or 10% that's immediate income, that's right now, mitigated by the best A-rated insurers per standard, per S&P, Standard and Poor's, per Moody. we beat the S&P 500 last year. Somebody brought that to my attention. So those investors who are not focused on ESG, they'll say, well, you know what? I think that's pretty good. I really like that rate of return. And, that's good that you're doing that.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of what I'm getting at is it seems, given that this is the real estate risk report, right, is that yeah, I'm sure they like the return, right, and who wouldn't, right, but at the same time is understanding that when Van wakes up in the morning, you're trying to make a difference in people's lives, right? Like, and I would say that push comes to shove, although you said the investors are first, that's the right thing to say about as it pertains to being the manager and managing member of a partnership of investors, that are limited partners.
Yes, sir.
But at the end of the day, from what I've known of you, is that you're a big-hearted guy and you care about making a difference, right? And that's why you do what you do. You're not necessarily doing it because you want to be the wealthiest guy on the planet. It's that you want to store up treasures in heaven, right?
Amen.
And yeah, so I'm just saying, right? Like, so it's just like, it seems that it's important that people understand that the investment they're making, although it will generate a very good return, right? It isn't without risk. Like one could argue, I mean, you haven't inserted leverage as a risk, which would be, even more so. You've removed leverage, so that's off the table, right? But ultimately, some of these things can go sideways, right? Like sometimes the bad guys don't go quietly, right? Like sometimes those people don't let you do what you want to do, right? And that means that sometimes, the investment could be at risk, right? Like, and sometimes municipalities aren't as friendly as you want them to be or whatever, meaning there's risks that you have to mitigate. And of course, you're mitigating that by the way that you approach it and the way that you're aligning yourself with the different stakeholders and those sorts of things. And obviously, but it's not without risk. And ultimately, and that's why I just go back to is that because, hey, if it turns out that, the market turns against you and we go into a recessionary environment that ends up having more impact on those people, the low income people, whatever, right? It could mean that, there could be loss of principal, right? It could mean that on a given project or multiple projects or whatever, because by its very nature, you're investing in areas that need a lot of work.
Oh, yeah.
And your ability to turn them around would mean that the reward could be high, but the risk was high too, because that's what you're doing. You're de-risking it.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
When you went in, like into, that mobile home park that you have, in South Carolina, right? Like it was very risky day one. Now, once again, you got it for, song and dance. The guy probably he basically gave it to you or whatever, but nonetheless, you had to put out capital to turn it around. And, as time went on, you obviously removed risk, and that's the execution side. I mean, that's you decided to leave your family and go move and spend, half of your time living amongst, in this environment to make it happen. Right. So I think it's important. And that's why I do this show. It's just that it's great. And I think that it is important for investors. And that's why I asked the question of who's in it for the social impact, because to me, if you decide to allocate capital to a strategy like yours, then you need to understand that, to make a difference, it gets, now you're doing most of the dirty work, right? But even for them, they have to understand that there is more risk there, right? And so, yeah, you can feel good about the investment you make, but you need to understand that it's good to feel good about it when everything's going the way you want it to go. But if it turned against you, you need to be the same one who says that's okay, right? Like, yeah, I had 50 grand and and I only ended up getting back 40 grand or whatever the case may be. That could happen. And and it should be when you make a decision to invest like that, as from a portfolio perspective. Right? Like, you've got so much money to invest. Now, it wouldn't be prudent to go all in on your strategy. If all I had was $1 million to invest and I invested every red cent of it into your strategy, that would be foolish, right? Like, and this is what I mean. You got to pan out and say to yourself, my portfolio, the money, my nest egg, it has jobs to do. The portfolio has jobs that need to be done. It needs to generate some income. It needs to have some growth, right? You need to expose it to some volatility, some defensive strategies, different things. And they need to be done in the appropriate amount given where you're at in your life cycle, right? It's different if you're 80 versus if you're 50. So But it also, and I think this is where ESG comes in, it's that I think that people are beginning to realize that your portfolio should also be doing some things, your money, some of that should be doing more than just that, right? It has another job to do. It's affect and impact people's lives.
Purpose.
Right? Yeah, purpose, right?
Purpose.
So I think it's just important that people look at it like that.
Mhm.
And that's what I mean. The last thing I want to hear is someone goes into some deal like, oh, it didn't work out that way. And it's like, because I was only interested in the 10% return. Well, then you're the fool. Like you shouldn't have done that, right? Because you should have been like, hey, it's okay, man. We impacted people's lives. What about all those residents in the mobile home park in South Carolina? Their lives are, you helped make a difference. Like that has some value too, besides the check you got every month, right?
Well, it does have value also. However, to be very clear about risk and mitigating risk and all those things, most Class C properties are recessionary. So no matter what the market is doing, if you are, like you were talking about slumlords, us being decent landlords, having a decent, safe, quality, accessible, security, having a place for people to live, we have a waiting list all the time. So say, for example, the bottom fell out of the real estate market. Well, we made our profit when we bought the property. The other thing is, let's take Section 8, for example. A Section 8 person. If a person's on Section 8 and they're low income and say they lose their job, well, what happens is they take their pay stub, they go down to the Section 8 housing office, and they say, you know what, I lost my job. Now, guess what happens? Section 8 pays 100% of the rent. Whereas before, the resident might have been paying, based on their income, they may have been paying, the median is they pay 30% of their income. So they may have been paying 30% of their income. Now they're out of work. They have no job. Well, now Section 8 is kicked fully in, and they pay 100% of their, 100% of the rent.
Yeah.
Versus a Class A property where you have someone who's working and, oh, you know what? Apple, Microsoft, General, whoever laid off all of these employees, they got some unemployment, but they're not going to be able to afford their Class A rent. So our strategy is much less riskier than, say, a Class A. The other thing as it relates to social impact is is important. However, we have a fiduciary responsibility to our investors to, make a return, to provide what we've targeted, what we've said to, and I can't say guarantee. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to feel good about an investment and have our investors suffer or even risk losing any of their principal.
Yeah, and I get it. I guess my main point is to say is that I took on risk when I walked out of my house this morning.
Yes,
right?
sir.
Like the risk, if the risk meter, was at sort of moving up and down, me laying in my bed, the risk meter was wherever it was. The risk meter went up when I walked out the front door. When I got in my vehicle, it went up. When I decided to turn left across a busy intersection, it went up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess my point is to say is that yes, it all has risks.
Oh yeah.
You need to understand what those risks are. That's my point, right? Is to say, because I guess for me, it narrows it down to say that the people that you work with matter. In God forbid, if it was your time to go and you went away out of the picture, that would be bad, because the role that you as an individual play in executing said strategy is huge. That's why I kind of teed it up, is to say that those things all matter. That the way that you went about educating yourself and you're doing those things. I mean, I look at it as those are all things that you've done that mitigate the risk. As
Yes.
an example, you're a Veravest sponsor network member as well.
Thank you.
Right? So I mean, all those things. It's all of these things
Mm-hmm.
that you can do to send a signal to your investors that there are ways for you to mitigate risk.
Oh yeah.
Right? And there's those sorts of things. So that's more of what I'm pointing out. It's just that we have to evaluate all of the variables.
Absolutely.
Right? And understand that, yes, although you're not using leverage, that reduces risk. And you've got the story of the Class A stuff versus the Class C stuff, but you still have the notion that if you went in and all of those constituents in South Carolina turned against you, even the investment that you put out, it was at risk. Like it could have moved against you. And as you execute your strategy, that's what's always happening, is that you go in and find a situation where you believe you can turn it around and buy it at the right price and those things. But as you begin to lay out capital, you're not in control of all these other,
No.
these other people, right? Like you're trying to win favor with them. You're trying to do those things to put yourself in a position where you can turn it around. But that's where the magic is, right? It's in the
Oh, yeah.
operator. It's in the person that's doing it, And so it's just for people when they listen, it's like, this is all the stuff that you have to lay down. Just because some guy and my main point, right, Van, is to say, just because someone jumps up and down and says that they're doing ESG, social impact, whatever, like it's not all created equal. None of this stuff is. Just
No.
because someone says they're executing a mobile home park strategy in the Sun Belt or they're doing whatever, that doesn't matter. It's our jobs as investors, right, to dig into that.
Absolutely.
You're the active investor, but it's our job to dig into, how do you do what you do? Why do you do what you do? What would, because even for you, if you decided to take on too many projects at once, right, like you have constraints that are built in, because
Oh, yeah.
unless you've got, a twin brother, or you've figured out how to align yourself, once again, that's your whole job, is to align yourself with other people who have similar skill sets or complementary skill sets. You to execute the strategy, there's built-in constraints.
That's
'Cause
key.
if I saw you allocating tens of millions of dollars, like $50, $100 million, it's going to fall apart, right? So like those are the things that you have to look at, because the constraint is your ability to go in and win favor. That's your time is your biggest constraint in your strategy. It's probably not even capital. It's probably not even deal flow. It's the heavy lifting that's required to go in and do it right, because that's the impact part. So I just think that that's when people evaluate these things, understanding what you're getting into and why you're getting into it.
Absolutely.
And that the 10% does have risk. I mean, there is no such thing as a guarantee, short of, the U.S. Treasury or whatever.
Yes.
That's it. But that's what we use as our litmus test. So if that's risk-free, we have inflation that we have to take into account, right? That's not our friend. That's just a built-in cost, that we got to beat inflation, whatever that is. Going to be 2% or something here, whatever, right? They're going to try to keep that up, and then we've got to, that's how we have to assess it, is in isolation every opportunity. So I mean, it's good stuff. I love it. But it is to point out that there's a balancing act.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
To make a difference and do the right thing and to help people and change people's lives. It's easy for me sitting here in Portland, Oregon, to go, amen, Van, that's awesome. I love what you're doing, man. But I'm not the one who's sleeping in the double wide with the cockroaches and those sorts of things, right? Like it's easy for me to go rah from this side of the other side of the country.
Uh-huh.
And I just think that for investors, when you get into these things, it's like, make sure you understand what it is that the people who are trying to execute the strategy are doing, and just not kid yourself about whether or not it really is making an impact, or it's just sort of some loophole or something that the government or the promoter is putting forth to trick you into, allocating your capital, or, whatever the case may be, right? You got to go in eyes wide.
So I'll say this, Lance, and we really appreciate the hard questions, because those are the ones that matter, especially to investors, especially to potential investors, those who are doing due diligence whatsoever. So I'm glad that you mentioned that about the strategy, about the risk. So a couple of the things that we do is, so say, for example, we put a property under contract and we have 45 days due diligence whatsoever. One of the things that we do to mitigate risk, we first go in and we want to find out. So like Harvey, Illinois, like we have a portfolio in Harvey, Illinois. And there's one particular neighborhood. It's a rough neighborhood. The average investor would not want to, approach it. So my colleague, Cora Rogers, who's in Harvey, Illinois, and in the Chicago area, she's been in real estate. She's a little older. She's in her 70s, but, she's up. She's at them. She knows how to manage, manage managers. We look for active asset managers who are active, not confrontational, not cowboys, but who know how to deal with this type of resident. But the most important, before we even get to that, I call and find out what kind of participation do we get from the local police department? Do they have community policing program? What can we expect if we put up alarms that are outside? If alarm goes off, what is the response time? How long before they get there? All of those sorts of things. And insurance. We will not close on properties that are not fully insured. So if we get a tenant that says, hey, I want to burn the place down, or I want to kick holes in the wall, or I want to do this, then we plan for that. Now you have those kind of tenants even in Class A or the best Class B. One thing that I've noticed is that when we've approached people, I've told my managers, and I've done this myself, and asset managers, we're very reasonable, not condescending. I've approached people myself and said, hey, to a resident or two, hey, what's up? You've been here, let me talk to you. Oh, my, they get irate, my voice gets quieter. And that's how I train my staff as well, as my voice gets quieter. They get louder, I get quieter. And I say, well, you know what? I say, look, you've been here this amount of time. And eventually, once they kind of peter out, the air goes out, then they will say, okay, I understand. You know what? You don't have anything coming. Take $250 cash for keys. Let us pay for the U-Haul to come move you out. I'll get a dumpster. You put your trash in it. Leave my place broom clean, please. And that's how I train our managers. We have one lady who rent to own in a mobile home. We're in this mobile home for all of $2,000. This lady leaves her house. She's in a rent to own. Somehow or another, the house burns up on the inside because there wasn't oxygen. Well, thank the Lord we had insurance. Insurance paid $30,000. The policy that we had, for our, property insurance. So we were able to take those proceeds, buy more houses, have houses taken out of the park, that sort of thing. It was unfortunate, and we were able to give the lady $2,500 that she came into the property with. So we worked very hard to protect, and mitigate risk. But like you said, at the end of the day, I could drop dead tomorrow. Anything can happen. And so, I have a succession plan kind of in place for that either it's going to continue on or either the properties are going to be sold, investors receive, are made whole, and then we move forward from there. But I'm glad you asked those questions, Lance, and continue. What else you got?
Well, I think it's not even. I think it's more of that sort of key person risk exists with most everything, right? It's just
Yes,
so
sir.
it wasn't even to poke a hole in that. Like I think it's just that's the process one goes through. So that's, I guess, my main point is to say, if you're the sort of person that I'll call them a bleeding heart, being a bit offensive, but just really you're a bleeding heart. So it's like, oh, this is a social impact thing, so I'm going to put my money in there. Like I'm saying, yeah, I think that's important, right? Is that's the sort of thing that should attract you to that. Like you want to do that, and you should.
Mhm.
That makes sense, but it's understanding that you really if you want to be a good investor.
Okay.
And this is what I mean. All the things that you're pointing out, you're an active investor. That's why I like to have these conversations because,
Yes, sir.
see, there's
Thank
all
you.
these things that you do that it's sort of that you don't even think about. I mean, per se, right? It's just you do them because they make sense. That's what's made you successful, right? So when you're passive, you got to do the same sorts of things where
Absolutely.
it's running it down and saying, how does this work? Why are they doing it? What would they do in this situation? Mitigate that risk. To go in and convince yourself that things don't have risk is just not a good
That's
strategy,
foolish.
right? Or try to delude yourself into believing that it's all been removed. Like, oh no, there's no risk. It's very little risk. It's almost guaranteed. Whatever. Like, people do that. That's why I bring it up, because it's saying some of these things aren't that hard if you learn how to sort of peel these things back and think through them. Then you know the right questions to ask,
Yep.
and then you can get yourself to a point where you're comfortable, right? Where you're like, okay, I get it. It makes sense. And I understand what could go wrong. It's not to say that it would. And they're like, okay. And then I can live with that and move forward and feel good about your investment because it is impacting people's lives. The people that are involved do care.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And that's
They
what I
have
mean.
to.
Once someone says that that's how they're wired, if they're going to tell you that they do care and that they're all about, whatever, then you should push into that.
Yes.
Right now, because some people never breathe a word about that. They're just like, dude, I'm here to make money. That's what we do. Right. Like, yeah, we're not doing wrong by people, but I'm certainly not doing anything per se to like, I mean,
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with that either. Right.
Yeah.
It's just saying that sometimes this is how people get duped in these investments.
Oh,
and
yeah.
is that they just, they don't think it through. And I think that's the important thing. Like, understand who the people are, why they do it, what motivates them, what drives them, and think through the things that could go wrong. Understand that
I
you
agree.
can't mitigate all the risk out of it, And
Yeah.
when you get that check in the mail for 10%, understand that someone worked hard to generate that,
Oh,
right? Like I
absolutely.
think that that's important too,
The
you know?
investor is the
So,
lifeblood of the operation. I mean, I'm invested into the fund. I think I have like 1,200,000 or 1,230,000 something invested in the fund. The other thing is we use NES Financial. We had a big press release with them. We really liked them as our fund admin. And we really wanted to be certain that the investor understood that we are, for real social impact. Because people put this title on, oh, yeah, yeah, we're ESG. Oh, it's this, it's environmental social governance fund. We do this, we do that. And then when you peel the onion back, you find out that, wait a minute, how are they measuring impact? Do they have a verifiable method? Is this, sincere? Do they really care? And so with a lot of companies, and I just read a really good article about this, and on Fox Business, there was a guy on there just the other day who had, a really good interview with Stu Varney and Company, and he was talking about when you peel back the onion, you have so many companies that uh, what kind of analogy can I give you? The charity. You give $1 to charity, and 98 cents goes to administration, or 93 cents goes to administration. Less than 10 cents goes to the
hey,
charity.
ridiculous.
Those are some of these ESG funds. So that's why we work really hard to make sure we have a verifiable metric and all of those things.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And that's really what I'm pointing at. Is just like everyone needs to learn to do their own diligence, right?
Absolutely.
Things aren't always, unfortunately, it's the world we live in. It's always been like this. Things aren't always what they seem, just sort of, it's up to us. We got to be accountable to the decisions we make,
Yes.
right? I think that's just where we're at. So that's great stuff. I love talking about this. I personally I reached out to you and saw what you were doing. So, I mean, this is what I mean. Like I myself want to align myself with people that are wake up in the morning and try to make the world a better place for real and not just
Well,
saying it. I certainly feel like I have my own version of that. And so it's great to have you on the show. Where can people find you? They
okay.
would learn more about what you're
And
doing.
also, our managing director, whom you know, Michael Zayas,
Yeah,
will be on your show, I believe, either later this week or next week. Um,
very good.
okay, but we can be reached at 1-800-626-2089. Again, that's 1-800-626-2089, or theproactivefunds.com, proactiveincomefund.com.
Very good. Good stuff. All right. Thanks, man. It's been great. Have a good day.
Thank you, Lance. You too. I appreciate it.